All this was done that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet.
Who's the prophet?
Isaiah, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son. They shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us.
So I think, again, another witness. This is literally not just a son of God, the Son of God, but God, a premortal God as well.
You know, the JST changes the singular prophet in that verse to the plural prophets. Even though it's an Isaiah quote, there are numerous prophets that have borne witness of this moment.
Sure. And particularly in the Book of Mormon, we see that very clearly in that regard. Well, let's get them to Bethlehem. We see back in the Luke account that there is a taxing. And I think sometimes we maybe misunderstand a little bit of what this is because of our tax system. We don't have to go somewhere to pay our taxes. Today we can do it over the internet and everything. But what is going on there when Luke tells us that that in the days of Caesar Augustus all his empire should be taxed? What's actually taking place, and why does Joseph have to go to Bethlehem?
There are a number of prophecies that must be fulfilled. This is a unique birth. He's going to be born in Bethlehem. The son is going to be called out of Egypt. He's going to be a Nazarene. Every little detail has to be fulfilled. So the question is, here's Mary, a young woman, about to have her first child. She doesn't want to be away from home, away from her mother. So how is the prophecy going to be fulfilled? How is the Lord going to accomplish that one, is the question. Well, the Romans decide on an enrollment for the purposes of taxation, which sends people back on the road to their ancestral hometowns. Joseph and Mary are from Bethlehem. It's linked to a census
as well as the taxes, and has military implications as well, I think, in this regard. And so he goes back. Does Mary have to go with him?
She does, to fulfill prophecy.
All right. Now that's, I think, an important one. The distinction between legal, she probably doesn't have to go, but the prophecy has to be fulfilled. Why does she go if she doesn't legally have to be there besides the prophecy?
Well, she's 9 months pregnant. She's about ready to be delivered.
She wants to be with her husband.
Absolutely.
Let me describe something, since I've walked that. 92 miles from Bethlehem to Nazareth. In fact, I've gone both ways. Could have gone straight south through the hill country of Samaria into Judea. But more likely is the Jordan Valley route. Going from Nazareth out the Jezreel Valley, down the Jordan Valley, it's not too bad. It's slightly downhill until you get to Jericho. The last leg of the journey
pretty steep climb.
That's the lowest city on the globe, Jericho. You got to hike all the way up to the top of the hills, about 3,500 feet. We're talking 4 or 5 days of travel. Now, I have some respect for Joseph, having walked all that myself. But Mary, in her condition, all the way down the valley and through the Judean desert to get to Bethlehem, and then they arrived there. It doesn't say that Jesus was born that very night. As we put so many details together, we conflate all the accounts in our little Christmas pageants, but it says, and when her days were accomplished, that she should be delivered, she brought forth her firstborn son. So that was not an easy
there's another point to be made here too, and that is that sometimes external agencies fulfill God's will. Governments. If Rome hadn't have initiated the enrollment, would they have gotten there? Of course they would have, but how would it have happened?
And Cyrus sending the people back so that the Messiah could be born in Bethlehem. They've got to be back there. Yeah.
Sometimes we need to remember that God is a multi-purposed God, and He oversees all things, and all things are in His hands. And whether people or agencies or governments or religions understand it or not, they all work towards the same end. His purposes will not fail, including all these prophecies. Every whit of those prophecies was fulfilled.
What about the phrase, there was no room in the inn? What do we make of that, and what do we think of as an inn? I mean, it's not like they're pulling up in front of the Bethlehem Marriott. What do we think of when we think of the inn, at least in the context and culture of Jesus' day?
Stabling of animals is usually done in caves. Lots of caves around the hill.
So the inn would be...
Rather than a hotel room, we're talking about like a caravanserai or the Cataluma concept. It's where you'd bring your animals and stay for a time, and people would be close by.
Now, as I understand it, there wouldn't be a lot of privacy in those circumstances. It's not you're buying or renting a room for one set of families.
No, we've walked through some of those, and they're just open courts with little alcoves off to the side with a large central area where the animals could be kept. but then open-faced rooms on many of these.
The point is Jesus once of humble birth.
You know,
Because you compare him with Herod. There he is, Herod, in his palace in Jerusalem, or the Herodian, just southeast of Bethlehem, his luxurious palaces, and the real king of the Jews is born in the most humble circumstances we could imagine.
You know, and yet there's a merciful side to that, is sometimes we portray the innkeeper as a bad guy in some way, sending this 9-month pregnant woman away, but in reality it may have been a very merciful act as well, because in those crowded, stuffy, horrible conditions of the caravanserai, there would have been hundreds of people around for the birth of a child, but by being in the cave, as Kelly pointed out, with the animals, they did have some degree of privacy, and so while it was humble, it was also pretty private as well, too.
You know, the JST indicates the plural inns, that no one would allow them room. I wonder if money spoke as loudly then as it does today. If they'd been maybe people of means or maybe people of note, they could have gotten in. But the Savior comes in the most humble of all circumstances. It just gives me hope. If any of us were born in difficult circumstances or raised in difficult, challenging situations, he taught us through his own birth we can rise above those things and become even as he is.
You know, we talk too about Jesus descending below all things, and often we associate that with the atonement, as we should, but also from the very beginning. We start with him in the most humble circumstances.
There's something remarkable. While they're in those humble circumstances, some humble shepherds come in to testify that. I like that one verse especially out in the shepherds' fields, the angelic announcement, "For unto you is born this day in the city of David." City of David is usually Jerusalem, but Luke's writing, and it's okay for Bethlehem to be the city of David. David, the great king, was born there too. Two great ones from there. But a Savior, were they surprised at hearing a Savior was coming? Well, no, they've been anticipating a Savior coming for a long time. A Savior who is Christ. Christ, that's the Mashiach, the Messiah. They're anticipating his coming too. They're excited about that. A Savior who is Christ the Lord. Now, I wonder if there weren't some startled lifting of the eyebrows when they heard the word Lord, because Lord is the great Jehovah, the one who created the earth, the one who gave the law on Mount Sinai. He's coming as a baby in Bethlehem. I'm not sure that all the Jews at that time had put this all together.
It's so ironic that he created this planet for us, but when he came to the planet he created, there's no room for him.
Yeah. President Howard W. Hunter often says that phrase, "no room in the inn," has application for many people today, that it is symbolic in many ways, that just as there was in above the caravanserai hundreds of people going on with their life and revelry perhaps and noise and chaos, and not knowing what's going on down beneath in that cave where the Christ child has been born, how so much today is the same thing, that the world doesn't even know that this literal Son of God has been born. Well, thank you for joining us in this roundtable discussion. We've gotten the Savior born, but we're going to pursue a little bit further into his childhood and in his preparation for his ministry. Thank you.